without any further ado, please help me welcome Jon Powers.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Bill, for the introduction, and thank you so much for the amazing day today engaging the students. It was fantastic. I'm honored to be here today. Really a distinguished history of speakers in the series. I feel honored to be part of it. I look forward to talking about what we're doing at CleanCapital, but also wanted to sort of step back for the students in the room today and talk a little bit about my career path and my journey and how I ended up doing what I'm doing. But before we get started, I want to specifically thank the team here at Jon Carroll and the staff that helped put this together. It's a fantastic event. So thank you so much, Paula and your team, for helping to organize and get this underway. So I'm going to step back and talk about being here at Jon Carroll. How many people are from Buffalo in here? All right. Grew up in Buffalo, came down to Carroll. I was an ROTC scholarship student. I was actually an elementary education major. One of the things about doing ROTC and being a senior, we saw some of the hands go up, and my roommates who are here with me today, they were all looking for jobs the second semester of senior year. I knew exactly where I was heading. So it made second semester an entertaining time, but I didn't have to worry. I knew exactly I'd show up at Fort Sill in Oklahoma about 6 weeks after graduation. Now this is before 9/11. Many of you in the audience may have been yet in elementary school at that time, but for those that weren't, joining the military pre-9/11 was one thing. Being in the Army when the Twin Towers were attacked was a complete another thing. I was stationed in Germany where we were based, and I was telling the story earlier to the ROTC cadets, but it was a life-changing experience for many of us because we saw firsthand what we now would be doing and what our mission was going to be, and how our mission changed. So, and I'll talk more about this in the future, but my unit got deployed to Iraq in the summer of 2003, the early part of the war. Right after the invasion happened, we were the peacekeepers, per se. I was the mayor of about a 50,000 person sector of Baghdad, and we lived in Uday Hussein's palace on the Tigris River. In this palace was the most hostile sector of Baghdad in 2003 and 2004. We had a group of Iraqis that came to that base every day, and they would do a variety of things. They'd cut soldiers' hair, they'd do cooking, they were basically providing jobs to the local community. But actually, as they left in the evening, we knew many of them were taking intelligence with them. So where our communications equipment was, or for instance, how many trucks were on the base, or where our fuel trucks were, right? And for us, there wasn't a gas station you could pull up to. Those are your critical power supplies. So if the locals left at 6, by 6:15 we'd move our trucks to the other side of the base, and by 6:30 we'd be receiving mortar rounds wherever those trucks were. So for me, that was the first time I ever understood the idea of energy, and I got more interested in it. And I came back to the States, studied it academically, and then started to build a career in that space. What has led me now to launching CleanCapital. I'm going to talk more about CleanCapital here in a second, but for the students, I'm going to talk a little bit about that career path. For the ROTC cadets in the room, they heard the story already, so I apologize. But you sort of have transformational moments in your life, or experiences in your life. Being here at Jon Carroll is a transformational experience, right? You also have defining moments, right? And for me, defining moments meant decisions that I was making that completely changed the path that I was on. So I came back from the Army, came back from being deployed to Iraq. I went back to Buffalo, was going to get a master's in education, wanted to be a school principal. I was an elementary education major. And there was a documentary made about the unit I served with called Gunner Palace. It was the first movie about the war that came out. And the movie premiered at the Toronto Film Festival. My parents went up with me to see it. We were I just literally was about 6 weeks back from Baghdad, and now I'm an actor in a movie at the second largest film festival in the world, getting put into diesel jeans to wear the diesel jean party that night, where there's ice luges and scantily-clad models, and my whole life is flipping in front of me. And the film company, because I spoke on a panel after the event, said, hey, we'd love to invite you to come on tour with this film. We just bought it. We're going to take it around the country. So I said, sure, call me when this happens. Never think they'd call. Did a little bit of post-Iraq travel with my dad, went to Asia, came back, was a week from starting at the University of Buffalo, and I got a call from the film company. They said, hey, we're leaving next week. We're going to do 23 cities in 6 weeks. Are you coming? And I had a major decision to make. Grad school or movie tour. To my mom's dismay, I chose the movie tour. And not knowing what that would do to me. It completely changed my life for a couple of different reasons. One, I spent the next 6 weeks traveling the country talking about my experiences in Iraq. I met soldiers who had similar experiences that I did. I met politicians in Washington where I had never really been before, that I was influencing by providing information that they didn't have on what was happening on the ground there. There's some other transformational moments that I had along the way that led me to realize I had to do something different with my life. So I went back to Iraq in 2005 and started a nonprofit to work with kids in Baghdad, trying to keep 16 to 25-year-olds from being recruited into extremist groups, which is a huge issue on the ground there. Spent 2 years working on this issue. Won't go in depth on it, but basically 60% of the Middle East is under 25 years old. Compare that to 35% of it here at home. Now they've known nothing but war for the last some 17 years, or some 10 years plus. And we are facing a really large challenge where they're now being recruited by extremist groups, right? And at the time, and I would say argued still today, Washington was doing nothing about those type of problems and having challenges leading on real key issues. So in 2008, I decided to run for Congress. I was 28 years old when I decided to do it. Moved back to Buffalo. Ran a really, I think, a very good campaign for being a 29-year-old when it concluded. But ran on a platform of turning the Rust Belt into the Green Belt. I really liked the concept. I was getting into clean energy. And now some of these things are actually happening today. Tesla just opened a big plant in Buffalo. Got really interesting things happening here in Ohio. But I lost. And I learned a ton from that failure. I'd argue today losing was the best thing to ever happen to me because it sent me on a completely different career path. Moved back to Washington, got interested to focus more on clean energy. Started working at a think tank, running a think tank, but writing on the national security implications of climate change. I started to put myself out there. I was writing on Huffington Post, writing op-eds in the Washington Post, and a Senate staffer read one of my articles and calls me up and said, hey, we'd like you to come and testify to the Senate on the national security implications of climate change. Now, my wife said to me, do you even know what you're talking about? You've been working on this for 3 months. And I didn't, but I didn't tell them that. And I accepted the offer. This goes back to my Carroll experience. I spent the next 2 weeks literally writing a thesis paper on the issue. This picture here is me testifying. The guy on the left is Senator John Warner, who was a Lion of the Senate, Republican from Virginia, was the Secretary of the Navy, married Elizabeth Taylor, just an amazing individual, really cares about climate change. The guy next to me was a 3-star admiral. Then there was me. And this other guy's an Exxon lawyer. We won't talk about him. But at the end of the testimony, Senator Warner, who I'd never met before, came up to me and said, hey, I'm working on a paper on what the Defense Department should be doing on clean energy. I'd like you to read it. So he sent it to me. I penned it, sent it back to him, and he calls me over to his office. Turns out they'd paid an author about $60,000 to write this thing. And my friend and I, who sort of rewrote it, met with the senator, and he takes the draft and he pushes it back across the table and said, give me a new version by Monday. I'm like, wait, you just paid somebody like $60,000 to write this thing. But I took the challenge, made the decision to do it. Next thing I know, I'm a published author on what the Defense Department should be doing on clean energy. And got an invitation from the Obama administration to go in and serve as the first special advisor on energy to the Army. What does that mean? The Army has 3 times the square footage of Walmart in terms of facilities, right? So huge buildings they're running across the world. $4 billion electricity budget. Didn't know what they were doing in terms of finding ways to manage that. Renewable energy, energy efficiency, you name these different verticals. So I started to get deep on these issues, develop these policies, find frameworks to build out. And along the way, stood up a task force called the Energy Initiatives Task Force. We were doing large-scale renewable energy projects on Army bases at home. So while doing that, there was a former Goldman banker who was a Department of Energy finance expert who'd come over to the Pentagon and sit down with us and say, hey, we really want to securitize your power purchase agreements. And if you're not in finance, that means nothing to you. That meant nothing to me. I had no idea what he was talking about. And I learned quickly that no one else on my side of the table did either. So I went and bought Corporate Finance for Dummies, started reading it. So when this guy came over, I started to learn more about what he's talking about. And then I got promoted and got a job at the White House. I was the president's chief sustainability officer. And I oversaw what the entire federal government was doing in terms of energy and sustainability, including climate planning. It was an awesome gig, and I could talk for hours about different fun stories in that role. But I saw the same thing happen to Richard Kaufman, this Department of Energy expert, when he'd come to other parts of the White House, even the National Economic Council, and talk about these market-moving mechanisms to change clean energy. Because people didn't understand finance, it went over their heads, and they sort of ignored these big things. So he and I set up a clean energy finance working group, and we decided to focus on these issues and educate others, including educating myself on these issues. And when I left the White House, I knew that's what I wanted to do next. So when I left, I met my now partner, Tom, whose brother-in-law and I had served in Iraq together. Tom was a general counsel at a private equity firm in New York. He and I, over drinks, were lamenting about the inefficiencies of clean energy finance. And he said, look, I think I've got a way to crack the code. I just refinanced my law school loans on SoFi.com, which is a platform that if you haven't heard of as a student, you'll be getting a ton of mailers from them after you graduate to go after your student loans. But it's a cool fintech platform. I'll talk more about them later. So we took that idea, we hatched it, and we started to build a company which today is CleanCapital. So what does CleanCapital do? We live at the intersection of what's happening to the power sector, the clean energy revolution, and the finance sector, the disruption that's happening in the finance sector. Looking at those three areas, what's the common thread? There's massive disruption happening, and it's happening because of technology. Technology is causing disruption in those sectors. So what I want to talk about today is a breakdown of those three different areas and then how they come together, which is what CleanCapital does, but also sort of where the markets are going. So I want to start with the power sector. So the reason we have electricity in here today is because there was a grid built that the National Academy of Engineering called the greatest invention in the 19th century, right? It provides power through wires so you can turn on your light or plug in your smartphone and get electricity. And most people don't think about it, right? You just don't think about it. How does it work? You've got a major transmission or generating plant, right? Run maybe on natural gas or coal, sent through 5 million miles of transmission wires across the country, through over 5,000 substations, managed by over 3,000 utilities, so companies that manage this whole system, to provide electricity to your house, to your dorm, to this building, right? So that's the traditional way the grid was built. This is not replicated all over the world, right? What we have here in the United States isn't in sub-Saharan Africa. It's not in some places in the Middle East. Matter of fact, China has 3 different grids and has trouble connecting all of them, right? So this infrastructure is actually pretty amazing and very costly. But it's at risk and it's being challenged. Why is it at risk? So in 2003, this picture is actually of a tree here in Northeast Ohio that hit some sagging wires. Sent a shock through the system. A software was short-circuited here, caused a massive blackout that affected 50 million people nationwide for 4 days, and caused economic damage between $4 and $10 billion. And so think about that. Whether it be running your company, losing your stock in your refrigeration, Wall Street not being able to operate because they don't have power to run their data centers, right? All because a tree literally hit a line, right? In 2015, the Russians attacked the Ukrainian grid on a cyber attack, massively knocked out the Ukrainian grid. That was seen as a test run, right? That just 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration put out in a report that they are now targeting and infiltrating our grid here at home for a massive cyber attack, right? That would completely dysfunction our entire economy. In San Jose in 2015, San Jose is right south of Silicon Valley. A bunch of masked gunmen jumped out of their cars, shot and took out 7 transformers causing over $15 million in damage and knocking out power to sort of 17 critical transformers. The only reason we know about this is because a chairman from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission talked about this confidential story in a Wall Street Journal article. Those masked gunmen were never found. Again, it was sort of seen as a test run. And then, of course, natural disasters, right? Superstorm Sandy alone caused over $50 billion in economic impact when it hit the Northeast. This is a picture of Manhattan post-Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, right? Why does that matter, right? You've got Wall Street, you've got major economic hubs completely knocked out of power. So did they have a plan B? Yeah, they had a plan B, right? They had diesel generators in their basement. So what happens when you get flooded? Your basement gets flooded, right? Literally, the diesel generators could not work. Or there was so much need for diesel when Superstorm Sandy wiped out the Northeast, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York. You couldn't get fuel because the people that were prioritized to get the diesel included the military, the first responders, the hospitals, right? Not the fintech company or the biotech company or the Walmart, right? This was a major shock to the system and woke up a lot of corporate giants like Google, like Walmart, like Apple. And they started to say, well, how do we secure our own power? How do we bring power into our own control, right? I don't want to rely on that grid all the time anymore. So why can we do this today and we couldn't do it before? We can do this today because new technologies have emerged that allow us to have that distributed generation, right? So you've got solar panels, of course, things like fuel cells. You have software that manages what are known as microgrids, right, to let that power run locally. And different types of programs that allow companies like eBay to completely build islanded data centers, right, that they are 100% powered by the power on site. Why is that important to eBay? Because if their data centers go down, they can't do transactions, right? Amazon, Google, they're all doing the same thing. Walmart lost millions of dollars in frozen food in Hurricane Sandy and realized they needed their own on-site power to be able to provide power to its own critical needs. This is a very busy slide. I'm showing it because it sort of outlines what a microgrid is. So after I left the White House, I was at a company called Bloom Energy. It's a fuel cell company. And I led the development of a microgrid with the city of Hartford in Connecticut. City of Hartford got devastated in Hurricane Sandy. So Connecticut put out these pilots to try to test and build microgrids. This microgrid was a specific system that powered an elementary school that had a community center in it, and then a gas station and a supermarket. Why is that important? So when the grid went out, this centralized power system could almost act as a fallout shelter for the community, right? It had gas, had food, had a place people could go that was heated and warm, right? This is now operating and running, and you're seeing more of these systems pop up around the country. So the idea of this is we're going from a centralized power grid to a distributed power grid. So who's heard of Tesla? Everyone thinks about Tesla, they think about this thing, right? Their cars. The secret sauce of Tesla isn't the car. The secret sauce of Tesla is the batteries. Tesla cracked the code on getting electric vehicle batteries to work. And now they're using those batteries in people's homes, in the power grid. They have a massive factory in Nevada putting out significant production of these on a regular basis. But what also they're doing is creating, in Buffalo now, mind you, solar-powered tiles that power this battery that you can either plug your car into or it can power your home, right? Interesting, almost like a little islanded net zero home. So that's cool, that's sexy, I would love this to be my house. The challenge now is what does that mean for the current business model of a utility, right? A utility takes that power, generates it, sends it over wires, provides it to a customer. Now this customer is not paying the utility for power. Matter of fact, this customer may produce enough power they can sell it back to the utility, completely flipping on its head the business model. A similar thing happened in the telecom industry, right? So telecom used to have Think about it. You've a landline run through wires to another landline, right? In the 1990s, there was something called the Federal Telecommunications Act, because telecom was being managed by major monopolies called the Ma Bells, right? This Telecom Act disrupted the industry, forcing us to go from a centralized telephone system to a decentralized. Now you have cell phone towers, right, locally, not connected through wires, that are providing services that allow us, to give my phone to my mom, to get to the point where we now have these smartphones in our pockets, right? If that hadn't happened, we were living in the Ma Bell days, you guys would probably still have the dial-up phone in your dorm room, right? But now you all have your centralized power, or your centralized phone. On a big level, this is Apple's brand new headquarters, Steve Jobs' last vision for Apple. 175 acres in California, 100% renewable energy, a microgrid completely onto itself, right? Incredible feat for a whole bunch of different reasons. But also, think about the utility that's supposed to sell them power. That's a huge customer they just lost, right? So this disruption is massive and changing the way industry is being handled. So why does it matter, right? We live in a world today where only 2 in 5 people in Africa, right, a quarter of the world's population actually, have access to reliable power, right? This is a picture of the world at night. Here's Cleveland. Here's sub-Saharan Africa, right? There's no grid. There's no infrastructure providing power. But now, if you can take, because they don't have a centralized generation to run wires to that location to put power, right? But if they can now put solar panels in place or have solar-powered water filtration systems or solar-powered cell towers so they can have communications, it completely changes the way the world will be powered. So you take that the disruption and you marry it to another one that's happening in the markets today, and that's the clean energy revolution. Clean energy is not a new thing. This is Jimmy Carter, 40 years ago. Actually, I was born in 1978. He put solar panels on the roof of the White House. A solar panel today doesn't look a whole lot different than a solar panel 40 years ago, right? For a bunch of political reasons I won't get into, the panels were taken down in 1981. And solar just sort of chugged along. But why today? Why is solar all of a sudden taken off? Because it's not a new technology. Matter of fact, solar power came out of NASA. Right? This is used to help think about satellites and other things in space. So the reason we're in a position today that we weren't before. So Jimmy Carter, right? The price of a panel is super expensive, produced in little batches. No one really knows how to use them, right? Over time, more and more gets done to sort of improve it, but not much. And then in 2006, George W. Bush and a Republican Congress passed something called the Energy Security Act. The Energy Security Act put in place certain policies like an investment tax credit for solar. I'll talk more about that later. Or for wind. That helps incentivize the growth of the industry. 2008, markets crash. Right? We hit a recession. A bunch of money gets poured in from Congress into, they call them shovel-ready projects. Well, because this bill had been passed, there were a bunch of clean energy projects that were shovel-ready. So all of a sudden, a bunch of money comes in and helps accelerate the industry. That acceleration does a couple things. One, it brings efficiency through the industry. Right now, panels are being made more efficiently. People know how to implement them, build them, install them, manage them. So all that efficiency happens, and the markets absolutely take off, right? And it continues that growth today. But also the price of those panels continue to get lower. The price of installing them continue to get lower, meaning that it's cheaper to do the deal, right? To do the deals. So what does that mean for capacity? So when you think about where we are today, in 2018, this is a report that was just put out 2 weeks ago. 2018, 20% of our power, over 20% will come from renewable energy, surpassing for the first time nuclear power. People thought that would never, ever happen, and it's going to happen this year. Right? That nuclear power has been a baseload power of ours for a long time, and people thought that renewables would never meet that level, and they're about to meet them this year. We've had a 471% increase of renewable energies on the grid since 2008. 471% increase. Why is this happening? Prices are there, policies are in place, state level things like renewable portfolio standards, and I won't bore you with all this stuff, are in place, and the markets have aligned, the capital is aligned, things are starting to move. But also, these big players are committing to the renewable energy, right? You've got 60% of Fortune 100, so 60 companies, have renewable energy goals. 53 have 100% renewable energy goals, meaning Google wants 100% of their operations to be with renewable energy, right? That's incredible, right? Think about the data centers they have, the operations they have. Microsoft just last week signed the largest solar contract of all time. It was 315 megawatts. Made 2 huge projects in Virginia. Virginia is a state which is very unfriendly to solar, but they wanted Microsoft's business. So Microsoft said, we want solar. They figured out a way to make it happen. These companies in 2016 alone saved over $3.7 billion, $3.7 billion through renewable energy contracts, right? So Walmart is a great example. Walmart has been an industry leader in this. They don't really talk about it much. People don't really know Walmart's going green. But Walmart's not going green to go green. Walmart's going green because they are saving significant cash and able to budget economically their electricity budgets. And I'll talk more about how that works by going to 100% renewable energy. And it continues to grow quarter after quarter. It's also seen as a good investment now. So the world clean energy investment last year was $333.5 billion. It's estimated to get, since 2010, there's been over $2.5 trillion invested in clean energy. Just continues to go up, right? One of the challenges here, though, is still less than 0.5% of institutional capital is going into this space. And I'll talk about that here in a second, because this is what we're trying to address at CleanCapital. And then finally, this is about jobs, right? This industry is growing. It's growing hand over fist. It's creating a tremendous amount of opportunity here at home. 1 in every 50 jobs last year was a solar energy job. The 2 largest jobs growth in the market was wind technician and solar installer in the entire country, right? So these are not jobs in Manhattan. These are jobs in Akron. These are jobs in Iowa. These are jobs in Pennsylvania. These are localized career opportunities. And the growth continues to go, right? So solar last year had more jobs than all the fossil fuels combined, right? You hear a lot politically about coal jobs, right? And if you're a coal miner in West Virginia, it really matters to you that coal jobs are going away, right? We have to find a way to provide them opportunities to move into new sectors. But there are less people employed in the coal industry than in the car wash industry, right? Think about that for a second. We're about to spend billions of dollars, trying to spend billions of dollars to stand up an industry that not only is bad for us, but is less people employed than the car wash industry, right? Now, if you're a coal miner, we need to find a way to get you a different job, and maybe here, or maybe something else, right? No doubt about it, and we need programs to do it. But don't be sold on the fact that renewable energy are cutting the legs out of these industries. So lastly on jobs, what you're seeing in this space is it's moving heavily into the rural areas, right? So rural communities are having these jobs because you think about where wind turbines are in Pennsylvania, they're not in the city of Pittsburgh, right? They're running the mountain ridge near Altoona, right? So these are jobs that are localized there. And they can't be exported, right? We can't just bring in wind technicians from China every time we need to fix a wind farm. So finally, the last market segment I want to talk about is finance. Okay, so what's happening in the finance industry, and how is tech disrupting the finance industry? Used to be that if you wanted to start a company, you'd go to your local bank branch, sign up to get a loan, right? If you wanted to get a credit card, you went to your local branch, you started to get a loan. But there's been all of these developments in the last 10 years in technology that's completely disrupting the way we handle finance. Raise your hand if you've used PayPal or Venmo, right? Most of the people in the audience today, right? That is a financial technology that's managing the way you handle payments. It's actually sometimes managing the way we're doing personal finance. You've got things like crowdfunding, mobile payments, money transfer services, all managed online through technologies. And now big banks like Bank of America are moving into the space because they're being disrupted by the way this money is being moved. So why does it matter? You've got cool companies like CleanCapital, right? But you've got companies like PayPal, Lending Club, SoFi, which we talked about earlier. And I guarantee you, by the time you graduate, you'll get a letter from SoFi asking you to give you to redo your student loans with them. Last year, 26 fintech unicorns globally were valued at $83 billion. In the last 4 years, there's been a 600% increase in venture capital money. That means money going to new companies in the fintech space. A 600% increase in the last 4 years. It's over $40 billion in cumulative investment with companies like you see up here today. So why does that matter to the world, right? So if you think about going back to distributed and where the world is at night, right? That picture of sub-Saharan Africa, right? So 3/4 of the world's poor are what's known as unbanked. They don't have bank accounts. Why don't they have bank accounts? They don't have bank accounts for a couple different reasons. One, there's probably not a branch in their village, and they need to be able to walk to find a branch. They don't have the documentation, the paperwork, right, to open an account, or they don't have the money to actually do it. So what's happening today, much like the telecom industry, right, where they're leapfrogging ahead. Now people are managing their lives in third world countries on cell phones, right? Those cell phone carriers are becoming banks, right? So imagine Verizon is actually also your bank and providing services. Over 600 services now can be paid through your cell phones in third world countries, providing real opportunity. Over $1 billion, over 1 billion people today do all of their banking on their mobile phone. $1 billion people, right? So what does this mean? It means financial inclusion, right? It provides a way for folks who have never had the chance to build a savings account, right, to start to do that in ways that they never could. In the military, we were literally paying teachers and the Afghan military through their phones because they couldn't get phones or couldn't get bank accounts. So why does all this matter for clean energy? Why does this matter for CleanCapital? So when we're talking about the deals, the solar deals, or any clean energy deal, but this is specifically a solar breakdown. So this area down here, that's the cost of the actual equipment, the panels, the installation equipment. 64% of these deals are soft costs, right? Whether it be permits or corporate costs. This is the one we're going after, transaction costs, right? There's ways to really bring down costs in those deals, and I'll talk about what that means here in a second. So CleanCapital, going back to the fact that less than 0.5% of institutional capital is invested in clean energy. How do we change that? How do we bring more money to the space? How do we start to educate folks so they start to put their money to work in this place where major corporations are putting their mouth, right? So we looked at clean energy. We looked at clean energy finance and said, where are the inefficiencies, and I'll talk about that more. But then in other verticals, where is technology bringing efficiencies? So things like real estate investments, right, or student loans with SoFi. How are they using technology to better underwrite these deals and make them more efficient? So CleanCapital, we make solar investing simple. What does that mean? So when you build a solar project, and we actually own this FedEx facility. These are not those panels, but I go to FedEx as a solar developer. My buddy Pete here goes to FedEx as a solar developer. And Pete says, FedEx, I'm going to lease your rooftop for 20 years. I'm going to build a solar system on your rooftop. And I'm going to sell you power from that system at a discounted rate from what you're paying today to the utility. So as FedEx, what does that mean? FedEx says, hey, I'm paying less for my power. I don't have to take the risk of having to manage the solar system because if Pete doesn't know how to do it, doesn't produce power, I'm not paying for it. And it's done through something called a power purchase agreement. right? It's a long-term contract. So when they do that, they take something called the investment tax credit. We talked about this earlier, right? And build that into the capital stack. So when the market really started to take off in 2010, 12, and beyond, that tax credit became a really critical part of the deal. But you legally couldn't sell those assets for 5 years because there's fear from the IRS it'd claw back the money. So now, for the first time ever, there's sort of a secondary market for clean energy projects. Why does that matter, right? If our mission is to bring more capital into the clean energy space, right, how do we start to do it? This, for an investor, is a little bit of a high-risk deal, right? There's construction. If you're doing a brand new deal, it's construction risk, there's a bunch of other risks. But if this is a project that's been running for 5 years, and FedEx is going to pay me for the next 15 years worth of power, it's a really simple deal, right? We joke internally that's our gateway drug, right? We take these used solar projects that are operating, and we figure out how much they're going to pay out, and we put a number on them, we buy them, and then we have investors that want that long-term cash flow. So what does that mean? When these are originally being built, there's a New Jersey project, right? So in 2010, the market said, hey, one, do we even know if these solar panels things work? Two, you want to do this weird power purchase agreement thing that we've never heard of with FedEx, right? And three, is there enough sun in New Jersey to even make this work, right? Well, it turns out there is. They work. The power purchase agreements are great. They look like a lease. And now 10 years later, the market's way more educated on this. And folks, it's a lot less risky. So this was very early what's known as private equity money, super expensive money. And now this is becoming more efficient and bringing down the costs of the ability to do those deals and accelerating the growth of this. So CleanCapital takes these deals, acquires them, bundles them. So we have deals all over the country now, bundles them into big investment opportunities that we work with larger institutional investors. Like our first deal involved John Hancock, the life insurance company. Think about life insurance for a second. They take your money. They don't want to lose your money in case you die. They got to pay you back, right? So they want to keep a very secure investment. They see this as a very secure investment. So we pool multiple billions of dollars or millions of dollars worth of deals. Our first year we did $20 million. It was 15 different projects. The second year we did nearly $50 million. The first 2 quarters of this year, we're already about to break $100 million in deals. We will announce tomorrow, we signed it today, a new $250 million equity partnership with a major institution that allows us to buy upwards of $1 billion in solar projects over the course of the next 18 months. That's a pretty significant chunk of money. When I was an education major at John Carroll, I didn't know what $1 billion even looked like. I'd argue today I still don't, but it's a big deal. So why are they doing it? Why are these investors doing it? Are they doing it because they want to go green? No. They're doing it because these things have great returns if managed correctly. Compare that to the NASDAQ. Compare that to the S&P. Right? These are good investments. These are low risk, good return investments. And CleanCapital is building out pools of them for more investments, for more investors. There's a whole technology component to what we do. I talked a lot about technology today. We have a technology platform that takes a deal as it comes in and helps us underwrite it in a real efficient way. So we can buy a deal from Mike, which we did here in Ohio last year. That was a megawatt-ish, right? And we're about to buy a $35 million portfolio next week, right? Same type of management, the way that it's underwritten, the way we manage that deal, because we're empowered through technology. We continue to build that out. The technology gets better as we get better, but it's our sort of value add to the industry. So is the industry going to grow? Just think about this for a second. Renewable energy investments are expected to climb upwards of $11 trillion by 2040. Citibank in 2007 committed $50 billion to be executed over 10 years in 2007. They met that goal 3 years early, doubled down on it, and now have a goal of $100 billion in place. Bank of America did $150 billion by 2025. JP Morgan's about to pass their $200 billion goal. There's capital coming into the space. It's great for clean energy. It's great for all the work that I think obviously we're doing at CleanCapital, and the market will just continue to grow. We're at a unique point of that market at CleanCapital. We'll continue to take advantage of it. You can learn more about what we do at CleanCapital.com. And going back to being an educator, we launched a podcast called Experts Only Podcast. And if you're interested in the intersection of energy, innovation, and finance, which is sort of what we do, I sort of challenge you to listen to it. It's a good way to sort of keep up to speed on what's going on in the market. So with that, I think I'll open up to questions. Awesome. Or drinks.
I guess my question is just how have you balanced your portfolio a little bit since the tax rates have gone down?
Yeah, how we rebalance our portfolios.
So as the tax rate fell, the tax incentives became a little less valuable for all corporations. Has that changed your guys, the projects you take or anything like that?
Are you an accountant? Accounting major?
I was finance.
Finance. Oh, good, okay. Tax questions usually come from accountant. So, so how are we changing? So going back to that investment tax credit, if most people know this, but the the government passed a new tax bill changing taxes. There was a fear in the market that it would suck all the tax credit capital out of the market. It's not, actually. We're in this really weird state where a lot of businesses are trying to figure out their tax strategy, right? Points of my friend Phil Ryan, who's here from Cohen Partners, who does our tax strategy. But it's critical to figure that out, and they look at tax credits as another tool. Now we don't really care about them yet, right? Because mind you, we're buying projects after the tax credit's out of it at CleanCapital. For the market, it matters. For CleanCapital, it has yet to matter because it doesn't really matter. We've already bought it 5 years later, right? Tax credits are out of it. So that said, the market's coming back around now in the tax credit space. It's still a very crazy market. If you know tax credits, it's a good time to get into it. We just don't do it yet.
What effect, if any, well, I'm sure there's some, but what effect does the Obama administration have? And if you could,
Trump administration, you mean?
Obama.
Oh, yeah.
Trump.
Yeah.
And if you can,
Talk about the glory days.
if you'd be kind enough to maybe explain how different administrations would have affected your business, Clinton, whatever.
Sure. It's a great question. So how's the current administration affecting business? There was a real anxiety for many different reasons, but for clean energy when the Trump administration came in. But the reality for the industry, so last year, one example of what the Trump administration has done. In January, President Trump put tariffs on solar panels, right? What does that mean? So going back to these soft costs we talked about earlier, right? Part of this cost is the price of solar panels. Meaning if you're going to buy a panel from China, there's a lot of panels coming in from China and other places, they slapped a 30% tariff on that. Meaning we as taxpayers are paying more now to try to incentivize panels here in the US. So the fear, what does that mean to the market? The interesting thing that's happened, I think, is the issue wasn't the 30 cents on the project per kilowatt. The challenge was between September and January, when this was being talked about from a policy perspective. If I was going to do a deal, now we're not doing new deals at CleanCapital, but if we were doing deals, I would have no idea how to price that panel in a deal. So it literally stopped the market pretty cold until they figured it out. Now the deal's out there, the consistency is out there, and the market is starting to move. The key is the consistency, right? The consistency that was built up over years. Now, the reality is we're at a position today where the real play on clean energy is now at the state level, right? There was an Obama initiative called the Clean Power Plan. That would have had some pretty good positive effects. Even without it, though, the play for clean energy is a state level play, partially because, one, the Trump administration and this Congress will never pass some federal energy bill. They can't pass anything. Two, the fight is a state level fight at this point, and the market has grown and continues to grow. So it literally, there was a fear, no doubt about it. when President Trump announced he was pulling out of the Paris Agreement, which many thought is a hit on climate change, major corporations, hundreds of corporations around the country, cities, states, and others stood up and said, well, we're still in and we're committed to this, going back to those goals I showed earlier. So it definitely, when we look back over time, it will be a road bump in the growth of the industry, but that's it. The industry's here to stay. Clean energy is no longer an alternative energy. It's a mainstream energy and needs to be treated that way.
Hi, John. Thanks for coming to us today. I'm an MBA student currently. In one of our global management classes, we learned about how the Shell Corporation is investing a lot of money into solar energy.
Yeah.
Where does your company come into play with some of the major oil companies such as Shell, ExxonMobil, and are you guys in competition at all?
Not really, because the big, whether it be, we would take Shell money if they want to invest in projects, right? The capital they're looking to invest. So Shell, not so much Exxon, so much and others, they're investing in new projects, and most of that money, these big corporations, they want to write a big check, right? So they want to do what is known as utility scale power. So Saudi Arabia this week announced a 200 megawatt, which is a multi-billion-dollar solar. It's going to be 5,000 acre solar field in Saudi Arabia. That's the kind of stuff Shell wants to invest in, not the deal on top of Walmart. So our strategic advantage is we stay off their radar in those smaller areas. That's sort of where we play. We will get to a point where we're also doing those larger deals. As what it all comes down to is the cost of capital. How much is our money to do the deal? Shell money is probably cheaper than the money that we have. But Shell won't do the smaller deals at all. They don't have the capacity to do it. It's great they're putting their money to work in the space, though, and that they're smart and diversified. And companies like Exxon are getting shareholder pressure now to move into and address these risks by just putting all their money in oil.
You talked a lot about solar energy. Does your company plan on branching out into other types of renewable energy like hydro?
Yeah, probably not hydro so much, but other verticals for sure. So we started going back to the gateway drug concept. We started in operating solar assets. We're now moving earlier development solar. We also want to do things like energy storage, which is a really exciting new area. My background is actually broadly in energy efficiency, so we think there's potential there. Wind as well, but that will all come with growth as a company. This is our third year. We're just into our third year. We focus on doing what we do well and doing it good. So if we continue to distract ourselves by moving into new technologies, we'll hit road bumps. So we want to grow organically and do opportunities as they come. But that's why it's clean capital, not solar capital.
Yes, so you've spoken about some of the clean energy initiatives that larger corporations are taking, but what's it to say about the appetite from retail consumers of clean energy, so residents and things of that nature?
Yeah, so that really is a state-by-state play. I think where we are as a company, we look at that market, it's very saturated, which is good for the consumer. Meaning there's a lot of people willing to give solar loans out to homeowners. Why? Because to underwrite them, to do them, it looks like a lot like a car loan, it looks like a lot like a mortgage. And there's a lot of platforms actually that do what we do in the residential space. So California, there's literally handfuls of them. That market is growing, continuing to grow. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, just the truth of it, it's a really state-by-state play. Why? Think about when the sun shines during the week, you're most likely not in your house, right? So are you using enough power in your house to use all that sunshine? Are you gonna put a battery in your wall to capture it? Or do you have policies in place in your state that allow you to sell what's called net metering? Take your meter and actually run it backwards, selling that power to the utility during the day, and then you buy back from the utility at night. That's a complete policy play. I live in Virginia. Virginia has terrible, terrible solar policies. You literally jump the river to DC, and solar is absolutely booming. In Maryland, it's booming. But Virginia is owned by Dominion Power, and they don't support solar, even though they run a bunch of commercials that do. And so as a result, people like me don't have it in our homes.
So I know there's about 15 or 20 states that are unfriendly to power purchase agreement standards, or they may not have them outlined or actually may be unfriendly towards them. So do you have a business model that functions in those states?
Not really. To be honest with you, we have enough to do in the states that we are in. We'd like to, think about where the most sunny parts of the United States are, right? And we are only in a handful of them right now. Why? Because of policy. Texas, though, has just come around, is now one of the largest solar markets in the country. Florida has passed a major consumer-driven bill to thwart the utilities. Why does this should be completely blue, right? It should be all solar panels. But the utilities have fought it. There was a campaign by a group called Vote Solar that went to the conservatives of the world and said, hey, you know what's going on? You're being owned by a monopoly that's a utility, and you don't have the choice to put solar panels in your roof. This is about choice, freedom. So they changed the campaign language, ran a campaign, and got the state, not the legislature, the state to vote on a solar bill that now is allowing solar to start to grow. And I won't even talk about these areas. We're not going to go there for a long time. But more and more markets starting to grow. Illinois is starting to grow. Colorado's done great. Nevada's starting to grow. So these are places that we pay very close attention to. I was talking to a lot of faculty earlier today about the need as a business leader. I'm in solar, but this could go in a lot of different places, to understand and follow policy. It's a critical thing to begin to understand. Steve Case, who founded AOL, wrote an amazing book called The Third Wave, and it's all about the future of the internet. And he argues that there's a couple, he calls them the 3 Ps. 2 of them is partnering. Companies are going to need to partner with other companies. And companies need to understand policy. Because look at what's happened to Facebook today, literally this week, or Google. They are now actively getting more active in policy because it affects their business. Is that it?
We have one more question.
Yeah, Mike.
So, fascinating presentation and really well done. But when you first spoke to Congress, and
Yeah.
on your right was the 3-star admiral. About the time I also had dinner with him, and he talked about energy security.
Yeah.
Both in terms of the armed services as well as globally. And you touched on that a little bit, but I wonder if you could just come back to that, because I really think what's happening as we move from this grid to more distributed, I think it makes the world more secure in a whole lot of ways.
Right. 100%. And this is actually what I worked on in the Pentagon. So Denny McGinn, who was that admiral in that picture, he commanded Southcom. He's a very famous admiral. Went on to lead the American Renewable Energy called I'm totally blanking on the organization, but then went on and became the Secretary of the Navy, Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, right? And was instituting energy policies when I was at the Army doing the same thing. So why does distributed generation bring security, right? Here at home, it's a little bit different. It's very corporate, but it also really, we talked about the threats, creates less opportunity for threats when you control your own located power. So think about if a Russian cyber attack happens and attacks Wall Street and takes down the economy of Wall Street, right? Now that affects our pocketbooks, right, for sure. What happens if they take down the grid of a hospital, right? And there's people literally plugged in the wall on life support, right? Or they take down Central Command, which is managing our combat facilities in Afghanistan and Iraq today, right? Definite targets for things like cyber attack and power attacks. Flip that out to what's going on in Europe today. Europe is highly powered on natural gas. Where do they get their natural gas from? Anybody know? Russia. Right. Russia. Russia gets pissed off, they turn off the pipeline. Literally happened to the Ukrainians. Right? So the Europeans said, this is not sustainable. We need to create a more sustained system here to put in place to control our own power and provide better security and take us off of Russian reliance, right? Flip around to oil for a second, and we're talking a lot about power here, right? Electric vehicles, as utilities are scratching their head on the new business model, electric vehicles are coming along to be their next major demand source, right? Because you got to plug your vehicle in to charge it, taking us off of oil. At one point, we were spending, I'm going to get the number slightly wrong, but somewhere in the range of like $5 billion a day overseas for oil money. Right? This is how I first got interested in this idea. We were literally sending money into the Middle East to buy oil, to pay for our vehicles that were fighting in the Middle East, and that money was going to fund terrorists in the Middle East. Right? It's crazy to think about. And so that's how a lot of veterans actually, there's a huge veteran population in clean energy because of these issues. And you see the security issues. So clean energy can help address that and find ways to really bring it home, make it American, make it local. And it's something that we should all be striving for, whether you believe in climate change or not. I do. It's something that you can really think about a different way to approach it from a security angle.